My mother would have said, if you make your bed, you lie in it.
They're known as the ISIS brides, 11 women and 23 kids who for nearly a decade have languished in a dusty desert detention camp in northern Syria. Some of the children have known no other home, but the PM insists the group aren't welcome here.
These are people who went overseas supporting Islamic State and went there to provide support for people who basically want a caliphate.
This week they tried to make their way back home, but at the last minute they were turned around at a checkpoint and are back where they started.
They're all Australian citizens and, it breaks my heart to think of all these kids as young as 5, going through this ongoing trauma.
I'm Nicole Johnston, and you're listening to 7am. Today, Green Senator David Shoebridge and Professor Joshua Landis, founder of the Syria Comment blog, on the threat of radicalisation, the hope of rehabilitation, and what happens next as chaos takes over in Syria. It's Thursday, February 19. David, could you start off by reminding us who these families are that are trying to leave this detention camp in Syria, and how did they end up there in the first place?
The bulk of the Australians in this detention camp, and it's in a desert in the northeast part of Syria, the bulk of them are children. They were either brought over to Syria at an incredibly young age, we're talking, tiny infants, or they've been born in Syria, or they've been born in the detention camp. So the bulk of them are children aged from as young as 5 through to 12 or 13. And then there are some of their mums as well. So we're talking about 34 people who were on the bus. Around about 24 of them are children. I've spoken with 3 of the women. I've visited the detention camp in September of last year. And they're women who are now in their late 20s, early 30s. They had come over to Syria, some of them I know, as their partners, the wives of people who were fighting in ISIS with all of that toxic ideology in ISIS. They have been as young as 17, 18 or 19, these women. They expressed to me, the ones I spoke to, how deeply regretful they were of that terrible life decision and how very young they were at the time they went over. But, I don't know the story of each of the women, and they found their way into Syria.
Islamic State have lost their Syrian capital, Raqqa.
And then when the Kurdish forces defeated the ISIS regime, and, thank you to the Kurdish forces, and many of them Kurdish women fighters who defeated ISIS, these women and their kids got swept up and put into a detention camp, and they've been held in a detention camp for a decade now in northeast Syria, and they don't want any part of the conflict in Syria. They don't want any part of ISIS. They want to go home and bring their kids home, and that's meant they've been quite isolated and targeted by some of the other people in the camp who, maintain that sort of strong push, that ideological push. So they're very isolated. There's been instances of violence against them in the camp. The kids can't go to the school because they're not safe at the school. And, it's a series of tents and dusty tracks surrounded by barbed wire in the middle of a desert in northeast Syria. It's a deeply dispiriting place.
So, David, as you said, on Monday, these women and the kids, they got on a bus. They were planning to leave the camp, get to Damascus, and then hopefully on to Beirut and eventually home.
At the Al-Roj camp in northeastern Syria, a group of women and children hurriedly climbed into waiting vans.
Mommy, I'm here, Mama. Mommy.
Their faces covered with scarves, masks and sunglasses, and bags packed.
OK, you ready?
But of course, as we know, they were turned back. Do we know why that happened or what happened?
I don't know exactly why it's happened. I've been talking with people who are in contact with the families and their representatives, and what appears is they got through almost all the checkpoints that you pass through going from the camp across into the area controlled by the regime in Damascus. And they went through, I'm told they went through multiple of these checkpoints, and they were stopped at the final checkpoint and then turned around. And there are multiple potential reasons why that has happened. And one of the reasons given to us was that there had been no effective communication from the Australian government to the regime in Damascus to allow that to happen. I can't tell you for sure that that's true, but I do know they got turned around at the last checkpoint, and that would have just been soul-destroying. I think about all those little kids in the bus, close to getting out of this prison that many of them met in for their life and then failing at that last hurdle. Really soul-destroying.
You know, it is...
unfortunate for the children, though, caught up in that, isn't it?
It is, but we have a very firm view that we won't be providing assistance or repatriation.
David, the PM said about these women, "You made your bed and now lie in it." Now, many of these women, as we just heard, they chose to follow their partners over to Syria and to join ISIS. And there are Australians who agree with the PM, and they're worried about them being radicalised, especially after what's happened at Bondi. So can you understand why the government isn't that keen to welcome them back?
Oh, I can understand people's anxiety about the women. And if any of them have committed crimes or they've engaged in criminal activities, well, they should absolutely be held to account under Australian law. I can't believe the Prime Minister said that about a 5-year-old kid or a 6-year-old girl that I saw, or a 7-year-old kid or an 8-year-old kid, saying to Australian children, "You made your bed and you sleep in it." These children are innocent victims in this. They're Australian children, and the great majority of these people on the bus were Australian kids who had no agency, no control over what was happening to them. You know, it's hard to realise this, but Anthony Albanese is failing the moral test set up by Scott Morrison, who in 2022 brought a number of women and children home from the detention camp in Syria, put in place structures with ASIO and the AFP to oversight that return, put in place reintegration resources so the kids had as safe a return as possible. You know, I was appalled and shocked and horrified that a Labor Prime Minister would say that about kids.
And David, one last question from me. Do you know what other countries are doing about their nationals stuck in these camps? Because there are hundreds of people from all over the world, from Asia, from Europe, from Canada. The UK has had a really hardline position on them. So where does Australia fit into all of that? Is its position sort of the way most countries are looking at it?
Australia's position is uniquely awful, refusing to have any engagement to bring back their own citizens. And look, I've been to the camp. There's 2 layers of security at the camp. The external security is by a group of women Kurdish fighters and other fighters, and they're tough, right? They've been fighting ISIS for over a decade. And I met with them when I went to the camp, and they said to me, these tough women who fought ISIS and seen their friends and family die, they said, "Why isn't Australia taking these women and children home? They're your women and children. Why are you making us look after your women and children?" And they also said, like, the Australians are not the problem. There's another camp full of some 50,000, largely men, incredibly, connected to ISIS, incredible security risks associated with those detainees. But these women, and especially these children, are not the issue when it comes to the extremism.
David, thanks for speaking with us today.
Pleasure. Good speaking.
Coming up, just how real is the threat of radicalisation for these women and kids? Josh, we just heard from one of our local politicians, David Shoebridge, about the need to rehabilitate these women and children who've been inside ISIS. Now, how worried do you think the public should be about them being radicalised in these camps?
Well, now, these women and children, the 34 Australians who might be coming home, they've been there for 8 years. So many of those children are, we don't have any clue if they're radicalised or not radicalised. And same with the women. It's a mixed bag. There are many women who've come out of those camps and said, look, I don't believe in Islam anymore. I just want to go home. I want to take care of my kids. I want to get them an education. So there are mothers from right across the spectrum. You're going to get a totally mixed bag. But it's been chaos since they were arrested because the Kurdish militia that had control of these people in Al Hol camp, they did not have jurisdiction to try these people. America was paying for the camp to be held and paying for them to hold these people. But America was not interested in repatriating and no one else was. So they just got dumped and were kept in this internment camp. And now most of them are just been let go. And there have been a small number that have been moved up to Aleppo, but we believe about 20,000 have just fled into Syria, including about 6,000 foreigners. So these Australians are a small little subset of this group. And clearly, the Australian government is going to have to do some investigation, and they're going to have to send them to evaluators and figure that out.
Across the Middle East, though, have there been efforts in other countries to try and de-radicalise people who had been members of Islamic State?
There have been, and Saudi Arabia has a very good program. They have used imams and other Islamic authorities. They've given classes, and they've had these, sort of seminars and discussion groups, sort of like an AA group. But they've taken them seriously, and that's the most important part. And they've discussed it with them. And I think the government is going to have to do something like that.
Josh, if we could talk a little bit about the broader context of what's happening in Syria. Last month, we had the Syrian army sweep into the northern part of the country and take over those areas that the Kurds had controlled during the civil war. As we know, they're now emptying these ISIS, Islamic State, detention camps out. Why is the government doing that?
Well, we've got two major reasons. One is that this government is led by the head of al-Qaeda, who used to be the head of al-Qaeda in Syria, Ahmad al-Sharaa. Secondly, those people in the camps, those ISIS family members, many of them come from the tribal members of northeastern Syria. But now that Ahmad al-Sharaa has swept up there, and we've got to remember that many of the auxiliary troops he used to roll back the Kurds were Bedouin tribes, and it's their relatives who are in these camps. So they have rolled into these camps and they want to let them go. They feel sorry for them. They feel like they've been unjustly treated, which they have in a sense, because they've just been locked up and the key's been thrown away. No trials, no investigation. So there's a great deal of sympathy for these people and a feeling that they've been persecuted both by the Americans, by the international community, and by the Kurds. So they're letting them go.
So, Josh, what's going to happen to all of these detainees? Because as you said, some of them are being set free in Syria, some of them going home to other countries, some of them ending up in Iraq. What's going on? It's going to be chaos. And Syria has been chaos for the last year because at the height of the opposition fight against the Assad regime, there were 1,500 different militias in Syria. Ahmad al-Sharaa took over, but he was one militia. There were dozens of other militias in Syria that joined him in this takeover. He collected all those militia leaders together and said, "You are now the Syrian army." But many of those militia leaders are quasi-independent. They have their own ideologies. So these people are going to go back to their families. They're going to try to find a living. They're going to try to escape and go back home. It's going to be chaos. Now, these women and children, Syria doesn't really know what to do with them because you can't have trials for most of these people because there's no evidence against them. That evidence has been destroyed. It's already 8 years that they've been locked up in these camps. There isn't a good solution for them. Josh, thanks so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
Also in the news, Pauline Hanson has offered a partial apology for suggesting there are no good Muslims. The One Nation leader has been widely condemned for the comment, made while attacking the government over the possible return of the wives and children of Islamic State fighters. Hanson now says she doesn't believe there are no good Muslims, but added a qualifier saying, "In general, that is what they want, a world caliphate, and I am not going to apologise. I will have my say now before it's too late." And Australians are in for the biggest rise in health insurance premiums in a decade. A 4.41% increase will kick in from April 1. The hike, which is above inflation, was approved by the Health Minister. who says it reflects higher medical and hospital costs over the last financial year. I'm Nicole Johnston. This is 7am. Thanks for listening.